She's been around writing her entire life and has written many, many books, whether they were because she just wanted to write or it was part of her work on the collegiate level. And now writing this book with her husband that combines his art skills and love for her writing and cooking. My guest today is Mallory O'Connor. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
What fun! Let's just talk about this book that you've written, that you and your husband are soon
Oh,
to release,
right.
bringing together the kitchen, his art, and your love for writing. How did that come about?
Well, that goes all the way back to when we first met. And that was in 1962, which sounds like 1,000 years ago, but he's a
Not
great,
a thousand. I was
almost
born then,
60. We're just about to celebrate our 60th wedding anniversary.
which
So
is amazing. Congratulations.
thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it is kind of amazing. And we've had a wonderful, wonderful time together. And we both decided that maybe our interest in food and good wine and so on was genetic because his father was a chef and my grandmother owned her own catering business at a time when most women didn't go into business for themselves and act like an entrepreneur and so on. So we both have always eaten well
Mm.
in our respective families. And when we first got together at the University of California, Davis, uh, I was a freshman, and John was the teaching assistant in the first art class that I took at Davis.
I'm not going to ask you what kind of grade you got in the class, Mallory.
Well, we were very professional.
Okay. Okay.
We waited until after the end of the semester before he asked me over for dinner.
Mhm.
And he cooked dinner for me, and I said, "Oh, this is a keeper. I
I
can
bet.
let this one get away." So
So he was a good cook right out the gate, huh?
right out of the gate. Oh, yeah. And he loved good food, and we just had wonderful times cooking. And then we moved to Santa Barbara when he got a faculty job there 6 months later. So we said, probably wouldn't look too good for a faculty member to be living with a student. So we probably ought to get married.
Back in the day, yeah.
Yeah. So that's what we did and moved to Santa Barbara and just have had the most wonderful adventures.
And what made you think that you wanted to? And he's an artist.
Yes.
So, what made you think that you would come together with this book of recipes? Because recipe books, if you don't know, and thank you for watching, those of you who are watching, I appreciate it so much. This is going to be a lovely conversation. People reading cookbooks, tell us what that cookbook is going to be about and how will the pictures, the words, and the story help to take the readers on a journey.
Well, the one of the reviewers, I got some advance reviews for the book, and one of the reviewers started out their whole discussion by saying, "John and Mallory have reinvented the cookbook," and I thought that was wonderful because it's really true. Because this book is a cookbook, a memoir, an art book, and a love story. So it really kind of goes beyond what most cookbooks do. And it does tell our story in both the world of art and in our interest in cooking and good wine.
That
So
is that's wonderful.
yeah, it's a real. In the first part of the book, I talk about right after we were married, John took me to meet two friends of his, Bill Brown and Paul Warner, and they lived in this beautiful house in Malibu. And when I hadn't met them, but they were old friends of John's and established and well-known artists. And so Paul cooked a beautiful lunch for us, and we had it on the terrace overlooking the ocean. And it was heavenly. And then after lunch, we were talking, and Bill asked me what I plan to do. What's your field? What are you going into? I said, well, I would like to pursue a career in art. And do you have any advice for me? And he thought about it for a minute, and then he said, yeah, I'd like for you to think about how you might live the artist's life. And I thought about that, it's like it bothered me because I really didn't know, what did he mean, live the artist's life? What was I supposed to do it? I finally figured out, no, you don't have to live in a garret. You don't have to drink yourself to death. You don't have to cut off your ear. You live because your life is your art. And so you make it as beautiful and wonderful and meaningful as possible, as you would if you were creating a beautiful work of art. So that's the advice that Bill gave, and that's something we've tried to follow. Live the artist's life, and everything else kind of falls into place.
What great advice for all of us.
Absolutely.
One of the poems that I wrote in the book that I wrote, The Art of Forgiveness, is painting your portrait of peace.
Yes.
So if we think of our lives just as this man planted this seed in your mind and in your heart, in your consciousness, subconsciousness, to live an artist life. You are a writer and an art historian and a musician. What do you play?
I started out playing piano when my grandfather was a violinist and a composer. And my mother was absolutely determined that I was going to have a career in music. So when I was 4 years old, she bought me a baby grand piano.
What?
I wasn't going to have any choice in the matter, you see.
Wow.
And I loved music, and I was good at it. And I started taking lessons when I was 4, and took piano lessons until I was 18. I studied with some really significant people. I also studied the organ and became the church organist for St. Michael's Episcopal Church, where my mom and I went. And that was fabulous. I love liturgical music. I'm absolutely in love with Bach and, with all of the great composers of church music. And
wow.
So that was a ton of fun. So that instead of babysitting in high school, I was the church organist. That's how I made my pocket money.
How exciting. And that you loved it. It was not.
I loved it. And then I also was a big fan of folk music. So I started to pick up on Joan Baez and all of the Carter family and all the folk singers at the time. And I taught myself how to play the guitar and had a big repertoire of folk music, and ended up playing coffee house gigs in the Sacramento area back in the day. So that was fun too. That was always great sport. So I was a musician.
Yeah. So as you're living this life, how often do you think about, am I living this artist life that was recommended to me?
I think it's always in the back of my mind. Just, is this how I want to spend today? Is this how I want to spend my time? What am I doing that I really love, that I'm passionate about, that I don't mind doing, And I think one of the really great things on a number of levels was the fact that both John and I went into academic careers. So we knew, you're never going to make a ton of money that way unless you, win a Pulitzer Prize or something. But we both enjoyed having the time. It's like when we had a baby in 1965. It was great because one of us was always there. By this time I was in graduate school, and John was on the faculty, and we were in Ohio at this point, and he was teaching at Ohio University, and I was finishing up my master's degree. And little Chris always had one or the other of us there because we arranged our schedule so we could be with him. And it was wonderful. There wasn't the same degree of pressure and tension and strife and so on about childcare and who was going to take care of the baby. And
yeah,
it all worked out, We had our summers off, and so we could travel if we wanted to. It was a good life. We did that very much on purpose so that we would have time, to pursue our own interests and to travel and to enjoy our family and friends and so on, and not have to spend 60 hours a week at the old grindstone.
Yeah. So this book, which I tend to agree with the publisher who said that you all have rewritten the way that you write cookbooks. Um, how many recipes, how many paintings are there in this book?
Well, there's 107 um,
Recipes,
illustrated recipes. There's a bunch
illustrated
of other
recipes.
recipes, but these are the ones that John did a painting of. Was
Wow.
107, and then we have other recipes in the book, but we kind of focused in on these 107. And he did these beautiful, beautiful pastel still lifes of each one of the recipes.
Hmm.
So that's the whole. And then we have a lot of photographs in the book too of family and friends and places where we were. We went from Santa Barbara, we moved to Mexico
Hmm.
because John had studied in Mexico. He had intended to be an architect. And so he had gone to Mexico to study architecture and loved Mexico. So after we decided to leave Santa Barbara, he got a job at a small private school in Valle de Bravo, which was about 75 miles southwest of Mexico City. And we had a wonderful time in Mexico. And then came back and went on to Ohio, where I finished up my degrees, and then moved to Florida. Why did we move to Florida? Because we went out looking for jobs. I told John, I'm not going to ever again live in a place that doesn't have palm trees.
Ah.
Forget it. So we both went looking for jobs, and each had several offers, but the University of Florida offered both of us a job. So we were
Nice.
like, well, that's a no-brainer. Of course, we're going to go to Florida. Plus, it has palm trees. So
Yeah, yeah,
Florida.
and so as the art historian, that's what you taught at the university.
Yes.
So you've taught art history,
Mhm.
you have been a lecturer, and then finding time to write these books. This, which is really the cookbook won't be out till when?
They're saying probably mid-February.
Oh, that's not far.
No, we had planned a book launch on February the 12th to celebrate the birth of the book. So we're just we got our fingers crossed still that it's going to be out there by that time, but it's almost ready.
Well, then in the other books that you've written, like this series in particular, the Psychic Detective, Epiphany's Gift, and Key to Eternity.
Uh-huh.
It's a paranormal featuring this psychic detective. Tell us about that, and how does this artist who is living an artist kind of life uh, bring to life? Where did these characters come from?
Well, I started writing fiction back in about 1975, maybe. Um, what I found out was that I was still making art. I have a BFA in fine art, and then I got my graduate degrees in art history. But I was still making art, and what I realized was that there was more and more writing in my artwork. So it's kind of like William Blake, where he started writing poems and so on and incorporating them in his art. And that's what I was doing. So I said, well, why don't I just try writing? Let's do some writing. So I started writing fiction and had a great time with it and finished a couple of books. And I even had an agent in New York, Howard Morheim, who was shopping my books around. But nothing came of it. So I thought, okay, I've got other things I want to do. So I kind of put it on a shelf. But then after we came back to Florida, we were up in Tennessee at that point for a couple of years. And we came back to Florida, and I just kind of put it on the shelf and said, well, I'll wait on that. And then when we retired in 2005, I said, oh my gosh, I can do anything I want to. Let's get that book out and finish it. So I did. And the characters, I wrote a trilogy. The first publication was the American River Trilogy. And that was based, it's kind of autobiographical. It was based on my experiences growing up on the American River in Northern California. And it's about 3 immigrant families, one Mexican, one Japanese, and one Irish, that settle on the American River during the gold rush days. Mm-hmm. And then their descendants get all tangled up with each other in terms of their lives. So that was my first fiction that was actually published. Then I decided, okay, well, I've got that. Let's go a different direction. And I had, for a long time, been very interested in Cassadaga. I don't know if you're familiar with Cassadaga or not.
No.
It was a spiritualist community that was founded in the 1800s down by DeLand. And that was, of course, at a time when spiritualism and seances and psychics, were all the rage. But in this particular case, the people that founded the Cassadaga community were very serious about it.
Now, where's Cassadaga?
It's about down east of DeLand.
Okay, where is that?
Orlando.
Okay.
on the East Coast.
Okay.
And beautiful old community with most of the houses and public buildings there built during the late 1800s. So quite a charming place. And it has a whole community of psychics and mediums and people associated with psychic phenomena. And I got interested in a kind of an odd way. I was teaching a class on Native American art, and I was doing a lot of research on a group called the Weeden Island people. And there wasn't much information about them. So one of my friends said, hey, I know a woman that does psychic archaeology. Why don't you take her some artifacts and she'll tell you what she sees about them? And I was like, oh, right, that's really research, I was very skeptical. But she talked me into it. So we made an appointment and we went down. I asked Jerry Milanich over at the Natural History Museum, I said, Jerry, give me a shoebox with 7 Weeden Island artifacts in it. And I'm going to take them down to this woman who claims that she has psychic abilities, and I'm going to see what she says about them. And Jerry was like, oh my God, all right. So he did that, and I took them down to her, and it wasn't at all like I expected. There was no crystal ball. There was no, pookie or anything weird. She just took the items.
Pookie, I think that's a term right out of Harry Potter, right?
Right. She took the items out of the shoebox one by one and closed her eyes and told me what she saw. It was surprisingly within the parameters of what we knew, about these people. And then the last thing she took out of the box was this piece that looked like a piece of pumice stone. And she dropped it, just like it was hot. And I said, what's wrong with this rock? And she said, no, that's not a rock. That is the hip bone of a young man. And she said he was a very important person in his community. She said, I know I want to use the term prince, but I know that wasn't what they called people in the hierarchy, but that's kind of position he had. And he was accused of a terrible crime. And he knew who did it, but rather than rat them out, he took the blame. Wow. And they executed him, and he died a lingering, painful death. And then they found out that he was innocent. And she said the whole community just fell apart. It just unraveled. And, that it was a terrible tragedy. So I said, well, that's a great story. And I put all my
you were not like me, like,
well,
I was take this to the police department.
I didn't know how to take it. I was kind of like, okay, well, if that's what you say, well, all right. So I was still convinced it was a piece of pumice stone. So I put everything
Ah,
back in the shoebox and I took it all back. And so Jerry, when I took the shoebox to him, he said, "So how did it go with the psychic?" And I said, "Very interesting," and told him some of the things. And then I said, "But what did you put this piece of pumice stone in there for?" And he said, "Oh, that." He said, "We just had that down to the lab last week, and actually, that's part of a hip bone of a young man." Uh-huh. And he said, "You can't see it, but there's an arrowhead embedded in it."
what?
What? That's what I said. Exactly that. Oh my God. And I told him that's what she'd said, and he was like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." He wasn't gonna.
He still wasn't convinced?
No, he didn't want to believe it. Very much science guy. So I couldn't convince him of that, but for me, it was like, oh, I think she's onto something. So I continued the relationship and, went back to Casadega. Not a lot, but I got to know them, and I know her and her friends in the community, and I thought, this is really fascinating. So when I started looking for a character for my new series, I thought, let's talk about Casadega. Let's have a psychic from Casadega who can use her skills to help solve crimes. And so she teams up with Mauro Gaedo, who's a ex-FBI tough guy who doesn't believe in psychic phenomena. But he's got to admit she's onto something when she's tracking down art theft criminals. So it's.
And so, how many of those books have you written?
I have published 3 so far, and I'm working on book 4. Haven't finished it yet, but it's.
Yeah.
When I get the cookbook off my desk, it's the next thing I'll be working on.
So, this psychic, how is she discovering things? Where does she go into her place and space where it comes to her?
Well, she kind of does a meditation exercise and kind of detaches herself from what's around her and kind of goes down into a sort of deep meditative state. And then very frequently she tries remote viewing. I don't know if you're familiar with remote viewing, but even the CIA and military has employed psychics to do remote viewing because they have a rather incredible record of being able to see things at a distance. In their minds, they can see like an installation, they can see what's inside of it, they can see how many troops are there, It's fascinating stuff. And so that's what Epiphany does, is she sees, oh yeah, I can see where that painting is. It's and she can describe where it is and help track down the bad guys.
So, Mallory, do you find that you have any of those abilities?
Okay. I took a workshop with a fellow that does what he calls Silva mind control. And I took it with my husband, John, and with a friend of ours, Nate Shiner, who loved that sort of thing. And we all took it together and we tried some of the exercises. And one of the things that they did was a remote viewing exercise of people who had medical conditions. And everybody wrote a name of a friend that had a medical condition and the condition. And then we all passed cards around and didn't know whose was whose or whatever, and just took one. So I had a name, and actually I just had the name, and I was supposed to envision what was wrong with this person. And by going down to level and then trying to see in my psychic vision what was wrong with them. So what I did is I saw an outline of a human figure in dark blue, and then right across the thigh there was a jagged red line. And I said then, when we came back up and said, okay, found out who had described each of these. So I said, okay, Jim Blum or whatever his name was. I saw him and I saw that he had this jagged red line across his thigh. And the person that had written it down said, "Oh my gosh, he was in a motorcycle accident and broke his leg."
Really?
Yeah. So I thought, well, that's interesting.
Were the other people accurate too?
A lot of them were, and they were surprised. They weren't counting on that. It was kind of revelatory. And my husband described the person. He started describing. He said, "Oh, they have a terrible headache," and then he fell over backward and was just sort of writhing on the floor, holding his head, and said, "I can't see." And the workshop instructor got all upset and rushed to him. And the person who had written the name on the card said, "Oh my gosh, I probably shouldn't have done that because the person had a brain tumor." And John apparently is what they call an empath in the psychic world. So he not only sees what's wrong, he feels what's wrong. And
wow.
He wasn't prepared for that. So he hasn't tried anything like that since. It's like, oh, get me away from this stuff. So
you guys have one child. Did he get pregnant too? Did your husband get pregnant when you were pregnant? Did you notice? Well, I'm just saying, did he feel things that you felt?
He was very supportive.
No. I'm just saying, like, did he get sick? Did he have any thoughts about when labor was going to happen?
Yeah, this was really a bizarre story. I hadn't at all intended to get pregnant. Things happen. and we were in Mexico. What? And living in this little village, Valle de Bravo, that had one telephone. The nearest doctor was 10 miles away in another village. We didn't have a car or anything. And so my mother was having hysterical fits saying, "Get out of there." So we moved into Mexico City, and I had found a very good doctor at the British hospital there. And we were all planning to stay. Chris was going to be born in Mexico. But about 2 weeks before the baby was due, we were on a bus and somebody stole John's wallet and got his Visa card and his papers and his passport, everything.
Wow.
So we had to figure out what we were going to do. Were we going to go take a train up to the border and renew our papers? And I said, I don't think I want to have the baby in the middle of the Sonoran Desert. So maybe we ought to cut bait and go back to the States. So that's what we did. We got back to San Francisco on Tuesday and stayed with my parents, and Chris arrived Friday morning.
Wow, that was close.
He's never forgiven me for not being born in Mexico. Wanted to have citizenship.
Yeah, that's a close call, though. Mallory, what fascinating stories you have. What a fascinating life that you and John have enjoyed together. Mallory is one of the 150 authors that will be a part of the Sunshine State Books Festival that's coming up a little later this month, January 27th and 28th at Trinity United Methodist Church in Gainesville, Florida. It is absolutely free to the public. On the 27th, there is a reception where you'll get a chance to meet the authors and have conversations with them. You'll be able to do that on Saturday as well. And come with your bag so that you can fill them up with books. How important is this? You're on the committee for this book festival. It is sponsored by the Writers Alliance of Gainesville. How important is this event for writers and readers in North Central Florida?
I think it's really a very important event because this part of the country, this part of Florida, has an amazing literary history. There have just been tons of writers, going all the way back to the 1700s, who have written about this area, like William Bartram, John Muir, John James Audubon. They've come to Florida. They were enchanted with Florida. They wrote about Florida. Harriet Beecher Stowe. who had a house on the St. Johns River, and Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings, of course, and then just tons of authors. So being able to have a festival here to celebrate not only what we're doing today, but also the very, very rich history that this area has been a wonderful thing. And so the last 4 years, this will be the fourth year of the festival. And I think we've really been able to not only have a great time and visit with people who come and talk to them and sell our books and get to know each other, but also to talk about the very rich history that we have here. And it's just amazing. And we want to make more people aware of it. And we've gotten some wonderful support from things like the Florida Humanities, Visit Gainesville, City of Gainesville's outside agency. We've gotten grants from these people. We've gotten a lot of support from the business community, from GRU and Cox and so on. It's been wonderful. They've really risen to the occasion and helped make the Sunshine State Book Festival a real standout.
150 authors with a waiting list of 80, which means that this festival will be growing.
Yes.
Continues to grow.
Yes.
It will be at Trinity United Methodist Church here in Gainesville, Florida. You're certainly encouraged and invited to be there. There will be authors, Mallory, one of the paranormals. But Mallory, you've also written about the history of Florida, lost cities.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, that was in my academic life. I wrote 2 nonfiction books that were centered in Florida. One was The Lost Cities of the Ancient Southeast. I got a little unhappy teaching Native American art and architecture and realizing that people didn't understand. They say, oh, St. Augustine is the oldest city. I'm sorry, not by about 600 years, folks,
Really?
So I wanted to let people know that there had been significant architectural and civic entities in this southeastern area way back, to at least, around 1,000, the year 1000. So, wow, people need to realize that American history goes back a lot further than they would maybe otherwise think. And so Lost Cities was a book about the various architectural monuments and places where Native Americans' culture thrived and so on in the earlier years before exploration and discovery by Europeans. The other book, Florida's American Heritage River, is about the visual history of the St. Johns. So I looked at all the artists who had been enchanted by Florida, literally, I think, and had come down here to paint and to draw and to capture something of the flora and fauna and the landscape and the people. And Florida was just considered to be a very exotic place. And people up north were crazy to know what was here. And so people, like the Flagler, when he established his hotels in St. Augustine, decided to make it an artist colony and provided studio space for northern artists to come down and paint the Florida landscape. He wanted to make Florida a new center for art. And so
I didn't realize that, even though I've been to that hotel, which is fabulous.
A lot of good artists came down and had studio space there and did some beautiful work.
Wow.
So I wanted people to be aware of that. And there's also a photographer named Gary Monroe, who had a fantastic collection of what I would suppose you could call Florida kitsch, sort of pop culture stuff, mermaids and Mickey Mouses and all kinds of, Disney paraphernalia and tourist trinkets and talking alligators and so on. And so he collaborated with me on the book, and a lot of his Florida memorabilia is also in the book. So it's fine art and kind of pop art stuff.
Mallory, I would love to have you come back to talk about this lost cities of the ancient Southeast.
Okay, I'd love
Um,
to.
because as you know, I never heard what you just said. I've always heard the St. Augustine was the oldest.
Well,
Who would have known?
oldest European city.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, we need to talk more about that book because I know that's a fascinating read
Yeah.
for those who are looking for history.
Yes. Yeah. And people need to know that.
Well, we'll have to schedule that. I thank you for the work that you are doing with the Writers Alliance of Gainesville and the whole crew that have pulled together the Sunshine State Book Festival that will take place on the 27th and the 28th at Trinity United Methodist Church in Gainesville, Florida. If you are in the area or you can just plan to come, we
Yeah.
hope to see you. I will be there as well with my book, The Art of Forgiveness and Expression of Peace,
Great.
and so many other fascinating authors that will be there. Just some incredible stories that I've had an opportunity to explore during these interviews with authors and conversation. So, Miss Mallory, again, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you. And we'll see all of you at the festival.
At the festival coming up not long from now.
Okay.
Everybody, thank you very much for watching. If you're watching on YouTube and watching for the first time, I please invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you're watching on LinkedIn and or Facebook, please like and subscribe and just go back and watch this whole interview. Quite fascinating. I promise you'll enjoy it. Thank you all so much for joining us. We'll see you next time. I'm Pamela Marshall at the Wellness Radio TV and at the Wellness Radio TV podcast. Remember, there is healing at the well. Make it a fantastic moment.